haven't seen her in the House for a couple of years.
Oral questions. Questions orales. L'honorable.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition. After 9 years, this Prime Minister has doubled the cost of housing to the extent that the cost of a monthly mortgage payment in Quebec is $1,055 higher than it was 5 years ago. That's a 74% increase. And there's 2 million Canadians that have to go to food banks when this government is wasting our money and the government is paralyzed by this cover-up of a $400 million scandal. What is this Prime Minister doing? He's saving his skin and his own members. Can he trigger an election? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance. Mr. Speaker, I'm happy that the Conservatives are starting with a question with respect to the Canadian economy, because I think that each of us can be happy that the inflation levels in September were at 1.6%. This is a great success for all Canadians. It will truly improve the life of Canadians, but the Conservatives don't want to talk about Canadian successes. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition, Mr. Speaker, when Canadians are going through hell with doubling of housing costs and out of control cost of living, what is the Prime Minister doing? He's trying to save his own skin, save his own members. And they're in a rebellion now. So he's not working for Canadians. He's working to save himself. It's strange. Even if the Liberals don't really have trust in this Prime Minister, the Bloc leader continues to have trust in this Prime Minister. Will the PM trigger an election finally so we can fix what he broke? The Honourable Government House Leader. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The question is why the Bloc leader, or the rather Conservative leader, is obstructing the House of this work. We won 2 confidence votes, and it's only the Conservatives that don't want to have another vote because they'll lose once again, because this House does not have confidence in the Leader of the Opposition.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
This weekend in Cloverdale, 15,000 people lined up in the pouring rain for the hopes that they might get a few rejected potatoes. It was Ugly Potato Day in that city. And 15,000 British Columbians are too hungry and desperate that they needed to go and collect those rejected foodstuffs. 2 million Canadians are lined up at food banks. There are 1,400 homeless encampments in Ontario today. And what is the Prime Minister doing? Working to save his political skin from his revolting caucus. This can't go on. Will he call a carbon tax election now?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I would really hope that every single MP in this House would agree that in our great country, no one should ever go hungry. But when Conservatives talk about the most vulnerable, they are crying crocodile tears. And how do I know that, Mr. Speaker? I know that because they have had the gall to vote against a national school food program, a program that will feed 400,000 Canadian kids. How can they look themselves in the face when they oppose feeding Canadian kids?
Yes, that's right.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
That program, though it has costed millions, has not fed a single hungry child. It has fed bureaucracy, which is all it ever was intended to do. Meanwhile, 2 million people are lined up at food banks. We've got 15,000 people that will line up for a, quote, ugly potato because they can't afford to eat. We have diseases like scurvy that are back. And 1 in 4 kids go to school hungry after 9 years of this Prime Minister, yet his priority is saving his political career from his revolting caucus. This cannot go on. Will he call a carbon tax election today?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives are damning themselves with their own words. I was at a school in downtown Winnipeg on Friday. I was there with Premier Wab Kinew, and we gave those beautiful, wonderful children some bannock, a little carton of milk, some jam, some butter, and a banana. That was not bureaucracy that fed those kids. That was the deal we've done with Manitoba. The Conservatives are against feeding kids.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Are you kidding me? She says that Canadians should be happy that while 1 in 4 kids go to school hungry, while 2 million people line up at food banks, while scurvy is making a comeback after 9 years of this government, Canadians should be grateful that she showed up with a few snacks and a photo op at one school. Mr. Speaker, this is the same finance minister who has just blown back $7 billion past her deficit target, meaning more inflation and higher rates. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister hides in the fetal position under his desk. Will he call a carbon tax election now?
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, we have clearly knocked the Leader of the Opposition off his game this week. Because how can he have the temerity to talk about actual meals fed to actual children as bureaucracy? That tells you how cynical and how low these Canadians go. And then he talks about inflation. Mr. Speaker, it's been in the Bank of Canada's target range for 9 months in a row. It fell below.
He's so out of touch, it's crazy.
The Honourable Member for La Prairie. Where is the pilot on the Liberal plane? It's October 21st. They only have 8 days left to pass C-319 and boost seniors' pensions. Otherwise, they'll be heading to an election. Pension increases. The Conservatives are for it. The NDP is too. 79% of Canadians are for it. And even the Liberals voted for it at committee. There doesn't seem to be a Liberal pilot, and they just have 8 days to go. Is that why the Liberals want to kick their leader out? The Honourable Minister of Employment. Mr. Speaker, thanks to the Canadian government, the Liberal government, we have been able to bring the retirement age down to 65, and we increased the GIS, and we have been able to help hundreds of millions of Quebecers with dental care. And this has allowed us to bring the poverty level down for seniors well below the national average, without the support and help of the Bloc. The Honourable Member for La Prairie. Guess who hasn't said a word yet about C-282, blocked by 2 senators? Yes, the Prime Minister himself. He has never asked Peter Boehm or Peter Harder to do their job. Not a word. They're too busy removing the daggers from their backs. Yet, not only did he appoint 2 senators, he also has a personal relationship with Peter Harder. He's already called him personally several times for advice. Can he now call his buddy Peter and tell him to do his job? The Honourable Minister of Public Services and Procurement. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My colleague knows perhaps that the reason why we're talking about supply management in Canada, it's because there was a Liberal government that did establish supply management for Quebec and the rest of Canada. And the reason why we haven't, negotiations with the Trump government negotiated with the Liberals, and this is how we were able to fight tooth and nail for supply management and Canadians.
The Honourable Member from Burnaby South.
Mr. Speaker, country first, party second. According to the RCMP, the Indian government hired thugs to terrorize Canadians. The Conservatives are laughing about this, but people have died as a result, and they've meddled in our politics. The Prime Minister has said that there are multiple Conservative MPs and or candidates compromised. They may be sitting in the chamber right now, but the Conservative leader chooses ignorance. Has the Prime Minister directly urged the leader of the Conservatives to get his security clearance?
The Honourable Minister for Public Security.
Mr. Speaker, we thank our honourable colleague for the question. We've been clear. We think all party leaders in this House should have the required security clearance so they can receive information concerning the threats to this House or the threats to Canada involving foreign interference. We also take the comments of Leader of the NDP very seriously with respect to protecting Sikh Canadians and protecting those who've been victims of this foreign interference by the Government of India. My responsibility as Public Safety Minister is to ensure the safety of all Canadians, and that's exactly what we're going to continue to do.
The Honourable Member for Burnaby South.
First, party second. I dare the Conservatives to laugh again. I see they're not. They're quiet.
Narendra Modi must not see
angry.
that a Canadian leader is willing to turn a blind eye to crimes committed against Canadians. Every of this House must condemn India's interference, and there must be consequences for parliamentarians who contribute to it. Did the Prime Minister directly urge the Conservative leader to apply for his security clearance? The Honourable Minister of Public Safety. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister was very clear. We fundamentally believe that all party leaders in this House must have their security clearance appropriately so they can learn what is needed to manage their parliamentary caucuses and understand the threats that Canadians are facing. And I applaud fully the feelings of the NDP leader in terms of condemning the Government of India's interference, and I congratulate the work of the RCMP for their work, and I know that the investigation underway will prove to be trustworthy.
The Honourable Member from Thornhill.
After 9 years of this NDP Liberal government, it seems that no part of Canadian life is safe from the Finance Minister's radical tax rampage. Not food, not home, not gas, and not even music. In response to new streaming taxes from this government, Spotify just announced that they're raising subscription fees by 15%. Even the simple things like kicking back and listening to your playlist isn't immune from this greedy government. When will the Finance Minister wake up, face the music, and finally admit that her new taxes and spending are not worth the cost?
The Honourable Minister for Heritage.
Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives once again are making the talking points of platforms that are making millions in Canada, and they have done so for years. Like all Canadian companies, they contribute to our system, but this is not the first time that they've raised their subscriber prices. This time, when it comes to helping our Canadian artists, the Conservatives speak out against it. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm not really surprised, once again, that they're in the pockets of these digital giants.
The Honourable Member from Thornhill.
Their hands are in the pockets of average Canadians. The Finance Minister told Canadians to cut Disney Plus, and she's probably going to tell them to cut their Spotify subscriptions too. They say that the taxes will fix climate change in the economy. They say that paying more taxes is going to lead Canadians to be better off, and all while they talk down to people. The carbon tax is up. The streaming tax is up. Capital gains taxes are up. And the Finance Minister missed her target by 17%. When will she admit that she has failed, axe the taxes, and let Canadians live their lives without their hands in Canadians' pockets?
The Honourable Minister. Order. The Honourable Minister for Natural Resources and Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We on this side of the House actually have a plan for a prosperous economic future for this country. The Conservatives, who continue to deny the existence of climate change, have a plan that leads backwards, not forwards. We are ensuring that things like the $12 billion Dow plant in Alberta is getting built, the $7 billion Jansen potash mine, electric vehicle and battery plants, hydrogen facilities in Nova Scotia and Newfoundland and Labrador. We have a plan for a future that is a great and prosperous future. They have no plan. Hey!
Is that the real Randy, or is that the other Randy?
The honourable member for Foothills.
Here are the consequences of the NDP Liberal plan. A new report shows that 35% of Alberta families are skipping meals because of high food costs. And yet, the Liberals and NDP tell Canadians they've never had it so good. But I'd like to remind the Prime Minister that his own parliamentary budget officer confirmed that Canadians are worse off paying the carbon tax. In fact, when the NDP Liberals quadruple the carbon tax, it will cost Alberta families $2,000 a year. Will the NDP Liberals just finally admit their carbon tax is a scam and call a carbon tax election?
The honourable Minister for Families, Children and Social Development.
On this side of the House, Mr. Speaker, we continue to fight for Canadian families. How do we do that, Mr. Speaker? One way is the Canada Child Benefit, Mr. Speaker. Families with children under the age of 6 can receive almost $7,800 each and every year per child, Mr. Speaker. This is tangible support that arrives each and every month to help families afford the basics or whatever their child needs. This is how we fight on this side for Canadian families, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Foothills.
I'd like to give the minister some actual facts of what real Canadian families are facing. Fact, 35% of Alberta families are skipping meals because of high food costs. Fact, food bank usage in Mississauga is up 60%. Fact, doctors are warning about scurvy because Canadians can't afford nutritious food. Fact, food inflation in Canada is 37% higher than the United States. Fact, their own parliamentary budget officer admitted and confirmed the carbon tax is all pain, no gain. Fact, the NDP Liberal government can end the pain they're inflicting on Canadians if they call a carbon tax election. Will they do it?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Well, Mr. Speaker, cutting a check that low-income Canadians are getting, the vast majority of them, over 80%, are getting more than they pay, is not going to fix an issue like scurvy. What's going to fix scurvy is certainly not cutting our health system. It's not getting rid of diabetes medication or getting rid of free dental care. It's not attacking the foundations of our health system, just as we're working with provinces and territories on solutions. Mr. Speaker, what is going to get it done in a time of global uncertainty is collaboration and working together, not nonsense slogans.
The honourable member for Bellechasse, Les Saint-Germain-Lévis. Mr. Speaker, the numbers speak for themselves. A September survey from the Quebec Association of Real Estate Brokers shows that the median price of a single-family home in Quebec has reached $450,000, an increase of 74% in 5 years. First-time home buyers now face an additional monthly expense of $1,055. In Saguenay, the purchase price has risen by $130,000, making home ownership even more difficult. What does the Bloc Liberal Coalition intend to do to help Quebecers? The Honourable Minister of Housing, Infrastructure and Communities. Mr. Speaker, the question is very interesting. The member knows that we're investing to build affordable housing in Quebec and across the country. In Quebec, we're investing more than $9 million to build houses. It's interesting because the Conservative were against this program to build housing. When the Conservative leader was housing minister, he only built 6 housing units across our country, and this is unacceptable. The honourable member for Bellechasse, Les Saint-Germain-Lévis. Once again, the figures are alarming. In Trois-Rivières, the price of a single-family home has risen by $190,050. In Drummondville, it's an increase of $204,000.
Wow.
And that's not counting the other costs associated with owning a home. These increases testify to a growing crisis that merits urgent action. In concrete terms, what does the Bloc Liberal Coalition intend to do? The Honourable Minister of Public Services and Procurement. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a coincidence that the Conservative leader is here today because I'd like to ask him to help me. Across Quebec, including in my colleague's riding, we'd like to find the 6 affordable housing units that the leader built across this country during his term. We still haven't found them. Could he come with me to Quebec to find them? The Honourable Member for Drummond. Recent events at Montreal's Bedford School remind us that it would be a serious mistake to take secularism for granted. On the contrary, we need to do even more. In Quebec, we're witnessing a return of religion in our schools after decades of fighting to keep it out. Gender equality, the separation of religion and state, is at the heart of Quebec's integration model, and it must be protected at all times, systematically, relentlessly. Can the government now pledge not to challenge Bill 21 at the Supreme Court? The Honourable Minister of Public Services and Procurement. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Unfortunately, there are Bloc members that confuses the Quebec's government's responsibility with that of Canada's. We are not responsible for education. Perhaps the Bloc would like it to be, but it's not the Canadian government's responsible. If my colleague wishes it, I would ask him to seek a seat at the National Assembly of Quebec. The Honourable Member for Drummond. One day we will get there, Mr. Speaker. But I'd like to remind this House that it offers prayer every day before it begins its work. And I'd like to remind you that this government continues to maintain a religious exception in the criminal code for calls to violence, even murder. And this is very serious. I'd like to remind you that the Prime Minister appointed a representative who spends her time accusing Quebec's Bill 21 of every evil. And we're just growing further and further away from secularism. Will this government listen to reason and restrain its irresistible urge to weaken the Quebec model of secularism? The Honourable Minister of Public Services and Procurement. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My colleague talks about urge. Well, if he does have an urge to talk about Quebec's responsibilities, we'd ask him to at the next elections to run for a seat at the Quebec National Assembly. The Honourable Member for Drummond. Usually I have respect for my colleague, but he's not even listening to my question and he's just saying anything. Quebec has chosen an integration model based on common values, gender equality, separation of religion and state, and our historical heritage. Ottawa can choose the opposite model, multiculturalism, which basically tells people they don't have to change anything. They don't have to integrate. And they say, well, it's no big deal. The federal integration model is contrary to that of Quebec's. When will this government or the next government understand that multiculturalism doesn't work in Quebec? The Honourable Minister of Public Services and Procurement. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Despite all of these efforts, I find it hard to answer a question that is on provincial jurisdiction.
From Regina Capel.
After 9 years of this NDP Liberal Prime Minister, Canadians are worse off. The effects of his deficits, his inflation, and his carbon tax hikes have been devastating. A new report by the Angus Reid Institute says that a majority of Canadians are struggling just to be able to buy food. And of course, that's even worse for low-income households, with 2/3 of those Canadians saying they can't even afford to feed their families. Yeah. One way to lower food prices would be to axe the carbon tax on the farmer who grows the food, the trucker who ships the food, and the grocer who sells the food. The Prime Minister could do that today. Yeah. Will he show some compassion, lower food prices, and just axe the tax?
The Honourable Minister for Natural Resources and Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Every day we see the Conservatives get up in this House and tell mistruths. 8 out of 10 Canadian families get more money back than they pay in the price on pollution. Of course, it is no surprise when you hear what their closest friends and allies have to say. Danielle Smith believes planes are spraying chemtrails. Jess Crosby says climate change is bogus. And John Rustad says fighting climate change is a plot to reduce the human population and force people to eat bugs. Mr. Speaker, they say you can tell a lot about people from the company they keep. Well, Mr. Speaker, you certainly can.
What the heck was that?
Although the Honourable Minister did not make reference to a particular member, I encourage all members, please, to skate further away from the line, especially in regards to using that word. The Honourable Member from Regina Capel.
Obviously, the carbon tax scheme isn't making Canadians better off. Otherwise, 2/3 of low-income Canadians wouldn't be reporting that they can't afford to pay for groceries, and they wouldn't be lining up at food banks or waiting hours to get rejected potatoes. The Parliamentary Budget Officer, the government's own watchdog, has concluded that when you factor in all the costs of the carbon tax, and remember, Canadians don't get to pick and choose which costs they pay, when you factor it all in, after they're done quadrupling the carbon tax, a family in Ontario will be $1,400 poorer. New Brunswick, $1,000 poorer. Saskatchewan, $2,000 poorer. So why not let the people decide in a carbon tax election?
The Honourable Minister for Natural Resources and Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Look, the Parliamentary Budget Officer and 300 economists across this country have said that 8 out of 10 Canadian families get more money back, and it works directly inverse to income. By taking away the price on pollution, you will actually make the most vulnerable more vulnerable. The Leader of the Opposition and his caucus know that, but certainly...
The Chair is having some difficulty hearing the answer of the Honourable Member. I'm going to ask the Honourable Minister to start from the top. I'm going to ask all members, please, I'm going to ask the Honourable Member from Foothills, please, to not speak when not recognized by the Chair. The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. But we know that the Conservative Party of Canada actually doesn't believe in the reality of climate change, nor do they have a plan for the economic future. They are no different from Mr. Rustad, who has endorsed the Leader of the Opposition, who says we should not be trying to fight climate change. The narrative about climate I can only put to the fact that somehow they think we need to reduce the world population. And many other candidates have essentially said we do not need to fight climate change. Well, Canadians know that climate change is real. Canadians know you need a plan for the future of the economy, and that is what is on this side of the House. Shame on you.
Order.
Make him retract. Come on.
I can take some slings and arrows, but I'm certain the Honourable Member wasn't referring to the Speaker. The Honourable Member from Dauphin, Swan River, Neepawa.
Mr. Speaker, after 9 years of NDP Liberals, taxes are up, costs are up, crime is up, and time is up.
That's right.
I recently visited a local food bank in Dauphin, Manitoba, where the volunteers told me they can't keep up with the increased demand. But this Prime Minister does not care, as he plans to quadruple the carbon tax and force Manitoba families to pay $1,300 in carbon taxes every single year. Manitobans can't afford this costly carbon tax. So when will the Prime Minister give Canadians a choice and call a carbon tax election?
The Honourable Minister for Families, Children and Social Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I recently had the opportunity to be in Manitoba and to speak with some parents about what they're facing there. I had the opportunity to announce alongside the Deputy Prime Minister that we've come to an agreement on our national school food program that will see this school year, Mr. Speaker, over 19,000 more children receive food at school, over a $17 million commitment over 3 years. That's what we do on this side of the House to ensure that families are supported, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Port Moody, Coquitlam.
Mr. Speaker, flight attendants, who are predominantly women, work an average of 35 hours a month unpaid. Wow. Consecutive Liberal and Conservative governments have overlooked this issue for decades. Yeah. The big airline bosses are profiting off of unpaid labor of flight attendants. It's time for this exploitation to end. Today, I will be tabling a bill to end unpaid work for all flight attendants in Canada. Will this government support it?
Good question.
The Honourable Minister for Seniors and Labour.
Mr. Speaker, Canadian airlines are, of course, private sector entities. The government sets a minimum standard and lets the hard work of collective bargaining take it from there. Flight attendants have a collective agreement which sets out their hours and their wages, and it's not my place to comment on it, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Rosemont-la-Petite-Patrie. Mr. Speaker, they are dying in the streets, on park benches, in alleyways, or even in outdoor toilets. The number of homeless individuals who have died has skyrocketed. It has tripled over the last few years. And that's just the tip of the iceberg, because many of the deaths are not recorded. This housing crisis is killing people. And the Liberals and the Conservatives have let this crisis get worse in order to make big developers richer. They have placed profits above people. What will the Liberals do to house people and save lives? The Honourable Minister for Economic Development of Quebec. My colleague and I both represent the eastern part of Montreal. And we see that there is a human crisis here. Unlike the Conservatives, who are exploiting this misery to score points, we on this side of the House will be working hard with municipalities to put a roof over everyone's head.
The Honourable Member from Etobicoke Centre.
Mr. Speaker, recently I spoke in this House about the growth of radical far-right movements. They've organized disinformation campaigns, impacted how some people and politicians treat others, and have led some politicians to act against the best interests of Canadians. Our government has said that Canada will stand with the Ukrainian people until they win. Ukraine must win because their victory is essential to Canada's security. There is a coordinated Russian campaign to spread disinformation, sow distrust, and encourage isolationism. Could the Minister of International Trade please share with us how Russian foreign interference is a threat to our support of Ukraine and to all Canadians?
The Honourable Minister for International Trade.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the member for Etobicoke Centre for his steadfast support for Ukraine. The Conservative leader's dismissal of Ukraine as a faraway land is shameful.
Shame.
Their willingness to appease far-right disinformation, often fueled by foreign actors like Russia, undermines democracy and the Canadian values. Canadians deserve leadership that stands firmly against these dangerous influences. While Conservatives abandon Ukraine, on this side of the House, we will keep supporting Ukraine until they win this war. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Again, I'm going to remind all members, please, to not take the floor when they are not recognized by the chair, so that the chair can listen and all members can hear the questions and the answers. The Honourable Member from Haldimand, Norfolk.
After 9 years of the NDP Liberals, taxes are up, costs are up, crime is up, and now time is up. At a time when Canadians are skipping meals and many are living paycheck to paycheck, the Liberals have siphoned $400 million of taxpayer money to contracts for their friends at the Green Slush Fund. The Liberal-appointed board has racked up at least 186 conflict of interest. When will this government end the cover-up so that this House can get back to helping Canadians deal with the cost of living crisis that they create?
The Honourable Minister of Innovation.
Disappointing, Mr. Speaker. After 9 years, the same slogan, Mr. Speaker, the same time of disinformation, the same time of false accusation. Mr. Speaker, it's time to get real. The Conservatives know very well that we acted timely to dissolve that organization, Mr. Speaker. The board has resigned, the CEO has resigned, and the organization no longer exists. We made a solemn promise to Canadians was to go to the bottom of this. That's what we did, Mr. Speaker, and they should let this House do the important work is to work for Canadians instead of filibustering their own motion, Mr. Speaker. It's shameful what they're doing.
Keep it quiet.
Order. The Honourable Member from Haldimand, Norfolk.
Mr. Speaker, what is shameful is cover-up. This Liberal government is still in contempt of Parliament by refusing to turn over the documents that could certainly reveal the depths of their corruption at the Green Slush Fund. So now they have paralyzed Parliament in order to hide their scandal. Meanwhile, Canadians are suffering through unprecedented food, crime, and housing crisis that they created. Will they finally turn over the documents today and give Canadians the answers that they deserve?
That's right. The Honourable Leader of the Government in the House of Commons.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What my honourable colleague is saying is false. The government has handed over thousands of documents, just done so in a way that protects the charter rights of Canadians. What
By
is
redacting
true,
everything?
Mr. Speaker, is that the Conservatives are filibustering their own motion because they don't want to respect your ruling, which asked that this unprecedented motion would go to committee. Mr. Speaker, I think there's only one thing the Conservatives are afraid of. They don't want this House to get to work because they know that if there's another confidence motion, the Conservative leader will lose it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
There you go.
The Honourable Member from Barrie Innisfil.
Well, after 9 years of this NDP Liberal coalition, taxes, costs, and crime are all up, and now their time is up. After Liberal-appointed board members of SDTC were caught funneling $400 million tax dollars to 186 of their companies, why won't the NDP Liberals end the cover-up today by releasing the documents as Parliament ordered and that you agreed with, Mr. Speaker, so that there can be accountability for the obvious corruption and potential crimes that have taken place under this costly coalition?
The Honourable Leader of the Government in the House of Commons.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The truth is, your ruling was to send this matter to committee for further study because it was unprecedented what the Conservatives were asking for. Mr. Speaker, we agree with your ruling. It is only the Conservatives who are obstructing their own obstruction because they don't want the truth to come out, which is that they are trying to abuse the extraordinary privileges they have to override the rights of Canadians. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Barrie Innisfil.
Well, the truth is that there is more proof there that these Liberals are not worth the cost, the crime, and the corruption. Here are the facts. 186 conflicts of interest took place. 400 million tax dollars were funneled to the companies of Liberal-appointed board members. You, Mr. Speaker, ruled that the evidence needs to be handed over unredacted as Parliament has demanded. Why are the NDP Liberals not releasing the documents? What and who are they covering up for?
The Honourable Leader of the Government in the House of Commons.
It's typical for the Conservatives to omit the facts that are inconvenient to them because the fact of the matter is that we have provided thousands of pages of documents already, that we are respecting your ruling, which is to send this matter to committee for further study, because I think, as all Canadians would appreciate and expect, they expect that police follow due process. They expect that parliamentarians support their rights. They would expect that parliamentarians don't try to abuse their extraordinary powers to go after their own partisan vendettas and attack Canadians. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Good answer.
Oh, hush up, Freeland.
The Honourable Member for Rivière du Nord. Mr. Speaker, as we speak, 3 vehicles have been set on fire in just 3 days in Ahuntsic. The federal government needs to realize that Quebec is now once again in a gang war with members that are younger and younger, practically child soldiers. This war is also costing innocent lives, like the lives of Léonore Géaudy and her 7-year-old daughter Vérane, who were collateral victims of criminal arson in Old Montreal on October 5th. And yet we're getting radio silence from Ottawa. What is this government waiting for? Why doesn't it crack down on these criminal gangs?
Wow, 7 years old. That's way too young.
The Honourable Minister of Public Safety. Mr. Speaker, on the contrary, we are not waiting. We are taking strong action. We are increasing staffing at the RCMP. We are investing in areas where the Conservatives cut, for example, in border services. And we are doing this in order to crack down on the criminal gangs. I had a very positive discussion with Minister Bonnardel during our federal provincial meeting last week. We agreed to continue working together. I will support him in what he's doing to ensure, for example, that drones cannot smuggle contraband into Quebec prisons. We will work together to do something about this. The honourable member. That's just not enough, Mr. Speaker. This gang warfare is affecting all of Quebec. In Montreal, 2 people died in an extortion-related arson case. In Frampton, a 14-year-old youth died, and it seems that it was because he was trying to attack the Hells Angels. Imagine that. In Quebec and in Quebec City and in maritime Quebec, it's been open warfare for months. On September 20th, Quebec police was warning other police agencies that this warfare could be even worse than in the 90s, and it's only gotten more serious since then. Does the government understand how bad things are getting? The Honourable Minister of Public Safety. Mr. Speaker, we understand that we need to protect the public in Quebec and elsewhere, and that's exactly what we're doing every day. I am very pleased to see that the RCMP is working with its Quebec partners, whether the Montreal Police, the Quebec Police, Quebec City Police. Mr. Duhem, the RCMP Commissioner, often talks to me about the fact that there are joint groups that are working hard to do something about gang warfare. We will continue to work hard, and I do believe that the Bloc Québécois should be supporting the federal government in this.
The honourable member from Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
In another conflict of interest involving this Liberal government's de facto finance minister, we found out that he's been caught using his access to lobby governments to benefit himself and his company. It's carbon tax Carney's heat pump hustle. And he's claiming it's green policy, but his only policy is to line his pockets with green. And this Prime Minister is shielding him from Canada's conflict of interest laws and lobbying regulations after 9 years of these NDP Liberals. Taxes are up, costs are up, crime is up, and time is up. Will they just have carbon tax Carney testify at committee?
You know, Carney's
the Honourable
been
Leader of the Government in the House of Commons.
He was awful.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, the Conservatives, when they have Canadians that oppose their policies, all they know how to do is attack them. Instead of respecting people and their differences of opinions, they go after them personally. Mr. Speaker, that's not how leaders in this country should act. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
Well, I can assure the member opposite that Canadians take it personally, that every time that they're given the opportunity, they don't help out Canadians, but instead help out well-connected Liberal insiders like Mark Carney with his heat pump hustle, carbon tax Carney, conflict of interest Carney. It's stacking up in such a way that we can't even keep track of all the scandals involving the de facto finance minister when the Prime Minister lost confidence in the finance minister. So now Canadians want answers about the access that carbon tax Carney has been given and all the Canadian tax dollars that he's lining his pockets with. Will they just instruct the de facto finance minister to testify at committee?
The Honourable Leader of the Government in the House of Commons.
Mr. Speaker, again, there they go attacking private citizens, and it just goes to show anytime a Canadian citizen speaks up against them, what do? They go on the personal attack. But, Mr. Speaker, I have a question for the Conservatives and the Conservative leader. Why will he get his security clearance, Mr. Speaker? It's a question Canadians across this country are asking because they want to know what and who is he trying to protect. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Bay of Quinte.
Mr. Speaker, after 9 years of this government, we have taxes up, we have costs up, times up, and credit card fees are up. And this government announced that they lowered credit fees, but this announcement flopped like a soggy pancake. Stripe, where Liberal leadership candidate Mark Carney sits on the board, said savings won't be passed on to consumers because of other rising costs. Wow, even Liberal insiders tied to oligopolies know that this government's announcements fall flat. When will these governments learn it's not Carney Canadians need, it's competition, and a Prime Minister who will flip real results for Canadians and their families?
The Honourable Leader of the Government in the House of Commons.
Mr. Speaker, the question on Canadians' minds this week is why will the Leader of the Opposition not get his security clearance? That's right. Mr. Speaker, every Canadian is wondering What is it that he is trying to hide, or what is it that he is trying to protect? It's an easy thing to do. All the other leaders in this place have done it. Why won't the leader of the opposition get his security clearance?
Good question.
I would invite all members not to speak unless they receive the floor from the Speaker. I know that the member for Mégantic-l'Érable understands. I would invite all members, not just on one side of the House. I would invite all members not to speak up while another member is asking a question or answering a question.
From Brampton South.
Mr. Speaker, the events of the past year and the announcement last week have shaken many Canadians, particularly those in Indo-Canadians and Sikh communities. Canada is a country rooted in the rule of law. The safety and security of our citizens is a top priority of our government. Can the Minister of Foreign Affairs update this House on the additional steps our government took to protect Canadians?
The Honourable Minister for Foreign Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, of course I will. As I mentioned since the beginning, we have three priorities. First, seek the truth. Second, make sure that we protect Canadians. And thirdly, defend Canada's sovereignty. Based on information provided by the RCMP, we asked India to lift the diplomatic immunity on 6 of their diplomats. Unfortunately, India refused. And so, therefore, since Canadian safety was at risk, I decided to expel them from Canada. Let me be clear, Canada doesn't seek diplomatic confrontation with India, but of course we won't sit idle with this information. Thank you.
L'honorable député de Charlebourg.
The Honourable Member for Charlebourg-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, for 3 weeks the Minister of Justice has been blaming the Premier of Quebec for the crime that is running rampant in the province. Meanwhile, the Canadian, Quebec, and Montreal police associations have all supported my bill, C-325, which aimed to correct the serious error of the Liberal Bill C-5. We know that there is an eye-watering increase in crime in Quebec and Canadian communities. Will the minister finally admit that it is wrong to say that police associations don't know what they're talking about? The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada, as I have told the member many times, we need to remember who is responsible for parole. We have created changes, but it's up to the provinces to implement. We need enough space in our courts. We need to have enough prosecutors. We need enough space in prisons as well, in order to make sure that we can house people in our prisons when necessary. And as I said, what my colleague really should do is speak to Legault. The Honourable Member. Mr. Speaker, I see that the Minister of Justice of Canada is still blaming the Premier of Quebec for a situation they created. They're the ones who brought in bad legislation. They've caused the problem in federal penitentiaries. Everyone agrees. For example, the Federation of Women's Shelters and all sorts of victims groups, they are all saying the same thing. Victims groups, police association, everyone agrees, except the minister. Why won't he finally listen to us, the Honourable Minister? On the contrary, Mr. Speaker. Look at what we've actually done on this side of the House. We invested $390 million to fight guns and gangs. We also increased sentences for certain crimes, for example, auto theft. And yet, the member across the way voted against that. And in addition, we also made parole less available for people who have committed serious and violent crimes on several occasions. That's what we have done, and we also expect Quebec to do its own fair share. The Honourable Member for Chicoutimi-Le-Fjord. Mr. Speaker, the Petit Paris sawmill in Saint-Gilles-Minot closed 1 day earlier than expected, and 100 people lost their jobs. First, this Liberal government botched the softwood lumber agreement, and now they're making things even worse for the forestry industry. Their decree will eliminate 1,400 jobs. And yet the Bloc Québécois seems to want to support this government nonetheless. Why does this government keep hurting the forestry industry, even though it is one of the main economic supports of our regions? The Honourable Minister of the Environment and Climate Change. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to remind my colleague that we are working closely with all stakeholders in the forestry industry, workers, businesses, communities, environmental groups, First Nations. We are also working closely with the Government of Quebec to find sustainable solutions for a sustainable forestry industry in Quebec.
The Honourable Member from Surrey Newton.
Mr. Speaker, we have seen a rise in serious crimes targeting Sikh Canadians and the South Asian community, leaving many Canadians feeling anxious and unsafe. Last week, the RCMP confirmed that the agents of Government of India have been involved in these crimes. Can the Minister of Public Safety please explain how the government is taking steps to ensure that all Canadians can feel safe in their communities?
The Honourable Minister for Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank our colleague from Surrey Newton for that question. He's right. Last week, the RCMP took the unprecedented step to share with Canadians information about a significant public safety threat. The alleged actions are a grave violation of Canada's sovereignty and the rule of law. We stand with the Sikh community, the South Asian community, in terms of assuring their safety. I want to thank all of those involved in this complex investigation. The RCMP, their partners in provincial and municipal police have done terrific work. Our priority is always the safety of all Canadians, and the RCMP will work with us to continue to assure that.
The Honourable Member from Windsor West.
Mr. Speaker, the multi-billion-dollar telecom company Rogers says that their latest price hike is the result of increasing cost of technology. Canadians aren't buying it, but they're paying for it. They were misled, and this is another ploy to get ripped off by Rogers, who just gouged out record profits. Now the Conservatives won't stop Rogers from gouging Canadians. They won't risk losing their maximum donations they receive from the company's owner. And the Liberals keep handing out millions of taxpayer dollars to Rogers, who is gouging those same taxpayers. Why do the Liberals, like the Conservatives, ratchet up corporate greed at the expense of Canadians? Why won't they stand up to Rogers?
The Honourable Minister for Innovation.
A lot of members here will take lessons from the NDP about standing up for what's right, Mr. Speaker. On this side of the House, we stand up for Canadians. We stood up to Rogers. We said no to their proposed merger, Mr. Speaker. We imposed the harshest condition in our nation history in a telecom, Mr. Speaker. That's right. We're always on the side of consumers, Mr. Speaker. We want more competition in this country, more choice for consumer, and lower price for Canadians. Canadians know we'll always stand up for them, and I think everyone should take a lesson from us in this House, Mr. Speaker.
Order. The Honourable Member from Kitchener Centre.
Mr. Speaker, last week an IDF missile strike burned Palestinians alive at a hospital tent camp. This escalation of what the University Network for Human Rights has called a genocide only emboldens Hamas and does nothing to return hostages. Canada's focus must be on achieving peace, including a true arms embargo, advocating for Israel to allow humanitarian relief in, and for an end to the occupation of Palestinian territories. When will this government's actions align with their words when they say never again?
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Minister for Foreign Affairs.
Speaker, the situation in Gaza is absolutely catastrophic. Too many innocent children, women, people have died. And so that is why we need the violence to stop. We need a ceasefire that is supported by the UN Security Council, including the US. We need hostages to come back home. Their family needs to be able to see them, to love them. And in the end, we need more humanitarian aid going into Gaza, and this government works on this every single day. Thank you.
All right, that's the end of question period. Let's just see if they're going to do any points of orders.
Standing on a point of order, the Honourable Member from Burnaby South.
I rise